Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Montesino, and I will be presenting today pages 254 through 280 of our textbook. We will be discussing a little bit of chapter 5, which is titled Islam as the System, Islamic States and Islamization from Above, and chapter 6, which is Islam for a Lack of a System, Islamism in Weak and Failed States. Let us begin. So first, I just want to quickly go over some of the pages before my assigned pages and state that they spoke about the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Revolution of 1979, for many observers, represented the zenith of modern Islamic revival and a source for propagating revolutionary Islam to other national settings. But the Islamic Revolution also is a moment in Iran's history that has set the course of how Iran's political system has changed and has worked since then till now. Upon the Islamic Revolution, when Khomeini took power in 1979, it was the end of over 2,000 years of monarchy in Persia and Iran, and it became a moment where the political system changed. The country officially became the official republic of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Khomeini set up a constitution which declared Shia Islam to be the official religion of Iran, and a political system was set up that was based on two foundations, a republic one and a religious one. This new political system has three branches of government that we traditionally see in governments around the world: an executive, legislative, and judiciary branch, which are complemented by the supreme leader. The supreme leader is appointed by an assembly of experts, while parliament and president are appointed by the people. The supreme leader is the most powerful of the Iranian political system, and the armed forces and police all answer directly to the supreme leader. This includes the Revolutionary Guard. The supreme leader also regulates the country's media and information services. In 1980, the year following the revolution, Iran became an increasingly closed society. New regulations came about by conservative clerics. Women, in specific, were the group that was most affected. Veiling was made mandatory by the year 1983, and family laws were revised to permit polygamy, child and temporary marriages, as well as gender segregation happening more and more. But by 1984 in Iran, inflation was high and money was in short supply, oil prices were low, and a subfaction of pragmatic realists arose who pushed for significant economic liberalization. The conservatives in government favored a privileged political role for the clergy and strict adherence to social norms. They were the inheritors of the Illumas, excuse my pronunciation, I'm sorry, the historical alliance with the Bazari merchants, and they benefited from private assets. This status quo was challenged by hardline revolutionary faction that sought for a radical redistribution of wealth in the name of social justice and the nationalization of industry. The way Khomeini was running Iran in its clear distance from westernization and proximity to a more and more conservative state, matched with economic instability, created much unrest with the other nearby countries in the Arab world. The Iran-Iraq War happened from 1980 to 1989. The Iran-Iraq War enacted a great toll on both countries, but Iran's use of quote-unquote human wave tactics created an entire generation of martyrs who would literally throw their bodies at enemy lines. After this, Iran's desire to clean up their international image was not helped when Khomeini issued British novelist named Salman Rushdie to die. Khomeini died in 1989, and Ali Khamenei was passed the role of supreme leader, while Ali Akbar Rafsanjani was elected president. There was also some amendments made to the Constitution, which eradicated the role of prime minister and gave the president more powers. The period of Rafsanjani's presidency is generally identified with the rise of a third significant force in Iranian politics, the pragmatists. This group, with Rafsanjani as their figurehead, had the main task of putting Iran's economic affairs back in order. They had these 5 year plans were introduced along with economic policies that would make it easier for Iran to qualify for loans with financial international financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. Rafsanjani's presidency was followed by Mohammad Khatami in 1997, and this is when the landscape of Iranian politics was significantly reconfigured. He was met with apprehension by the conservatives, of course, but one may note the parallels in perception of Khatami and the Soviet Union's Gorbachev, as they were both seen to be on a path of some sort of westernization and a way out of this conservativeness. Iran's next president was the highly conservative and homophobic Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He grew a lot of support by the working force and he promised the people a more hopeful Iran. He was very vocal about his anti Americanism and anti Israel point of view, and he raised tensions with the US and the United Nations by reopening Iran's nuclear program. Ahmadinejad's second election found Iran with much tension with the people of Iran and the government, as they were seen to have been fraudulent results. Then, in 2013, Hassan Rouhani was elected president of Iran. Let's discuss three noteworthy aspects that the textbook highlights relating to the role of Islam in Iranian politics. First, there's the fact that the religious scholars were no strangers to the political landscape, having played an important role in anti monarchical politics several times throughout the modern Iranian history. In this sense, they encountered very little in the way of social barriers when seeking to enter mass popular politics in the lead up to the Islamic Revolution in the 1970s. Second, and somewhat related, is the fact that while this was an Islamic revolution in name, it was actually a highly heterogeneous affair in terms of who actually took part. And third, although the ruling religious regime is often thought of in monolithic terms, it becomes very easy to identify a broad spectrum of interests, policies, and political visions that define several clear factions within the clerical establishment itself. Watching my presentation and that of some of my classmates, you will be able to compare and contrast, in my case, Iran's connection to Islam in politics and other countries in the Arab world, and how Iran is the country that has gone the furthest. I would like to share this quote that is in the textbook by Mohammad Khatami, and it says, "If we limit ourselves to the appearances of and have a narrow view of religion, then the concept of Islamic Republic itself will mean separation from Islam. Where did you ever have anything called a republic in Islam? Where in Islam, the beginnings of Islam, do you find anything called a parliament?" The point being that it is impossible to understand the meaning, the nature, and the form of the Islamic State today without reference to the discourse of political modernity that inevitably frames its very formation. The religious nature of this state is not achieved by placing the word Islamic in front of the word republic, but rather in assessing the normative implications inherent in various arrangements of power and social order. Now, let us move on to discuss some of Chapter 6, titled Islam for Lack of a System, Islamism in Weak and Failed States. Here we're going to examine several cases where Islam has sought to fill the vacuum of an absent state or social authority, or where states have collapsed, are functionally absent, or at best very weak. In this case of when a state is weak, Islamist actors who are well organized and well funded and well managed can emerge as a parallel service provider, and in some areas may even begin to resemble little shadow governments with just how much they become involved in public order and public welfare, and just as much they can become involved as well with foreign defense. The book highlights a case in Nigeria where between 1999 and 2003, 12 states in northern Nigeria passed legislation implementing varying degrees of Sharia law, even going as far as to sentence someone named Amina Lawal to death because of charges of adultery, which were then overturned. 50% of Nigeria is statistically Muslim, while the other 50% consist of different tribes, different religions, different languages. All right, now let's move on to Islamism in Palestine and let's begin to talk about Hamas. Hamas, as a political movement, was started in December of 1987, and it started at the inception of the first Palestinian Intifada, which translates to shaking off or uprising against the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas can be described as a social welfare organization, a terrorist group, or a political movement. And the textbook notes that it can be described as these three because it is, in fact, all three. Although it was formally founded in the 1980s, the social roots of Hamas date back to the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Before 1967, where the West Bank and Gaza came under Israeli control, Gaza was a part of Egypt and the West Bank was a part of Jordan. In 1967, when Gaza and the West Bank became a part of Israel, came under Israeli control, the Gaza branch of the Muslim Brotherhood became isolated from the central Muslim Brotherhood branch and its Palestinian affiliates. Hamas aims to create an independent Palestinian state in place of Israel. The PLO is also something that is mentioned in the textbook, which is the Palestine Liberation Organization. In the 1980s is where the path leading to the formation of Hamas out of the Muslim Brotherhood began. On December 8th of 1987, an Israeli truck crashed into two Palestinian taxis, killing their occupants. Palestinians took this as an act of aggression and took to the streets to protest. The next night, Muslim Brotherhood leaders met and founded a political movement that was to lead an active resistance in the name of Islam, thus creating Hamas. In the months to come, the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood merged itself into Hamas, and in 1989, Hamas took a turn from low-level violence to having firearms and explosives against Israeli forces. The early 1990s saw intense and violent conflict between Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces. In 1993, Hamas and Israel had secret negotiations going on called the Oslo Agreement, where Hamas was promised gradual political autonomy. The Oslo agreements were meant to end violence and start a series of talks that would eventually lead to two separate independent states. But the terrorism didn't end, and Hamas wasn't fully on board with the idea. Hamas wanted a fully Islam state, no Israeli, no Zionist state at all existing. Many Israeli citizens were killed in the attacks. There were many Palestinian citizens killed in the attacks as well. And in the year 2000, the second Intifada began. Thank you, everyone, for connecting to my presentation. That is everything covered on pages 254 to pages 280. I look forward to watching everyone else's presentations as well, and I wish everyone the best of luck.